There we go. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon and welcome to this decision-making meeting for Housing and Tackling Homelessness portfolio. I'm Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat Councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and also happen to be the relevant cabinet member. Before we get going on some of the usual things, just a few pieces of information for those people who are here in the Guildhall around safety. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not use the lifts. Please assemble by the Queen Victoria statue. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, whose building we are in, anyone who's signed in at the reception desk, please sign out when leaving. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting is being live streamed. Please use the microphones and remember to switch them off when you finish speaking or the camera will stay on you. That is a bad thing. Members of the press and public, we ain't got any, so I can ignore that then. Right, okay, so I will start with just introductions for the hundreds who are watching on our live stream, and I will start with Jane over there.
Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
And then I shall move along the back row.
Alan Denford, Finance Manager.
Tanya Foscari, Group Accountant.
Shane Galvin, Head of Housing Needs and Licence Support.
Jo Bennett, Assistant Director, Housing Need and Supply.
Emma Randall, Interim Head of Housing Supply.
Merrick Chavaskas, IT Business Partner.
Adam Hardwick, Assistant Director, Buildings.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Everyone is scared of the middle row, so now it's the front row.
Councillor Roman Dent Copner and Anchorage Park Ward.
Spencer Gardner, Member for Drayton and Farlington.
Greg Anderson, Residents Consortium.
Mary Valley, Councillor for Cosham and Wimmering.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, for Mary, Spencer, Ray and me, do you have anything interesting to declare that's relevant for this meeting? No. Right. Item 3 is a bit... Oh, Jane, you do.
May I just state the apologies for absence?
That's fine.
Mary Bailey and Mandy Buxley.
Mandy.
Sorry, Mandy Buxley.
From the Residents Consortium.
Yes, that's
Thank
right.
you very much for doing that. Thank you. So item number 3 is an omission notice due to the acquisition of temporary housing, which is related to the forward plan that we have in the council. The chair of the City Council Scrutiny Management Panel has been notified. That is Mary in the front row. Isn't it Mary? Oh, they've swapped. Well, that's a little bit more worrying actually, and we shall raise it has now. We shall raise this with the relevant people and deal with them afterwards. So, as chairwoman of this panel, do you have a problem with this being discussed today?
I do not.
Thank you. That's the right answer. Please keep going. That's excellent. Okay, so. Apologies for the omission on the forward plan, but this is a report that was agreed at full council just a few weeks ago. So we now move to item 4, which is the euphemistically titled acquisition of temporary accommodation. Who is going to deal with this? Oh, no. I'm not sure what was worse, the alarm or the phone. The alarm was worse. Okay, so who is going to deal with this then? Now back on course.
It's myself, Chair Emma Randall.
Thank you, Emma. Please fire away.
Okay, just to check everyone can hear me before I proceed. Okay. We're here today to seek the approval to acquire a minimum of 200 properties to be held in the Housing Revenue Account for use as temporary accommodation across the 2025 to 2027 budget period as part of the Homes for Temporary Accommodation project. On the 25th of February, full council approved the City Council budget, which included the capital expenditure line for this acquisition programme. Today's report provides the opportunity to outline the background and project detail. The recommendations of the report are to provide capital expenditure of 31.28 million to deliver up to 200 units phased at 15.64 million in each of the next 2 financial years. For the Cabinet Member to delegate authority to the Director of Housing for Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with the Section 151 officer to agree the use of HRA unsupported borrowing to support each of these acquisitions based on an individual financial appraisal of estimated income and expenditure. That the Cabinet Member notes that a general fund contribution of up to 1.87 million from the MTRS reserve has been approved by the Section 151 officer to ensure the HRA does not incur a negative cash flow in the first 10 years after acquisition. For the Cabinet Member to delegate authority to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in consultation with the City Solicitor to enter contracts to support the acquisitions. And finally, that the Cabinet Member requests Housing Cabinet reports to be presented mid-year and end of year to report an update on the progress of this project. The background to temporary accommodation is that the number of households in Portsmouth in temporary accommodation increased by 54% in 2024 to 25 to more than 500, with costs having risen by 84%. This has resulted in a forecasted overspend of 5.9 million for this financial year. The Council has a statutory duty to provide temporary accommodation to homeless applicants in certain circumstances under the Housing Act 1996. Where the Council has reason to believe that an applicant may be homeless, is eligible for assistance and in priority need, under the Housing Act, it must secure accommodation as an interim duty until a decision is made as to whether the applicant is owed the main housing duty. Where such a duty is owed, temporary accommodation provision must continue for that applicant until permanent accommodation is made available. Provision of temporary accommodation is a statutory duty and a priority for the Council. The Council's duties in relation to homelessness fall outside of the HRA and are the responsibility of the General Fund. However, the Council is able to provide housing accommodation, which includes the acquisition under Section 9 of acquisition of accommodation under Section 9 of the 1985 Housing Act, and properties purchased under these powers must be accounted for in the HRA as set out in the Local Government and Housing Act 1989 of Section 74. The vision and purpose behind this project is to support and alleviate temporary accommodation pressure by increasing the supply of properties available using the HRA's borrowing capacity. This will enable the HRA to fund and repair and maintain that accommodation, but with the duties under the 1996 Housing Act being accounted for in the General Fund. If the demand for TA or temporary accommodation reduces or is no longer required, the properties acquired for temporary accommodation can be returned to general needs stock. Every acquisition will need to meet approved acquisition principles and financial eligibility criteria, which is set out in this report and can be revised in agreement with the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services and the Cabinet Member. A financial appraisal will be needed for each acquisition, which will be approved under the delegated authority of the Section 151 officer and approved by an acquisition panel led by the Assistant Director for Housing Need and Supply and the supporting officers noted in the report. The reasons for the recommendations in this report are that the General Fund budget pressure arising from the increased demand for temporary accommodation is unsustainable. The Government has announced additional funding from 2025 to 6, but falls short of meeting the current costs and demand for temporary accommodation. This proposal seeks to provide good quality temporary accommodation, reducing reliance on nightly paid temporary accommodation, which is the most expensive form. This project makes best use of the HRA to support the temporary accommodation crisis and anticipates favourable cash flows of 44.8 million for the HRA over 50 years with an MPV of 7.8 million. It's important to note that this project forms part of a wider action plan and sets out a range of strategies to reduce the demand for temporary accommodation, increase supply of housing and reduce the financial impact. I'd just like to pass to Alan, Chair, to talk finally about the funding.
Thank you, Emma. It's estimated that this project will provide annual cost savings to the General Fund of up to £6 million per annum by the 2028-29 financial year. The Council will fund property purchases using unsupported borrowing within the Housing Revenue Account The interest costs will be paid from the additional rental income received. Overall, the project will have a positive effect on the HRA 30-year business plan. However, there are likely to be annual cash deficits for the first 10 years, totalling £1.87 million. To ensure that the HRA is not adversely affected, these will be funded by a contribution from the General Fund's MTRS reserve, which was set up to fund spend to save, or in this case, spend to avoid cost initiatives that have payback within 4 years. We're happy to take any questions now, if there are any. Thank you.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for that, Alan. Thank you for that, Emma. Greg, from the Residents' Consortium, do you have any views or opinions on this, or any questions at all? Please press the button in the middle, not at the side. Thank you. Officers will no doubt give a more detailed analysis. However, as someone who's, like the rest of my political colleagues, who's been involved in the weeds of all this for considerable, the position is slightly different here. One of the problems we've got, and one of the reasons why the overspend is as great as it is because actually the level of subsidy that's received is pegged to the local housing allowance for people in temporary accommodation, is pegged to the local housing allowance level in 2011. That's 14 years ago. And that's one of the reasons why we're in the mess. The mess we haven't created, but the mess that we are in. So while I understand your point in more general terms, in this particular instance, it applies much, much less. I'm looking at the professionals here to see if I'm right or wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So in answer to your question, which is effectively why is it affordable rent, the property has been sold, as you'll rightly say, and the council has received a return at some point in the past, but at this point is making an open market purchase. And in making an open market purchase, we need to ensure that we can recover the cost of that new property purchase. In terms of, that's the rationale for the affordable rent charge, and that does mean that across different buildings you can have different rents. You will have different rents for different property sizes as well within buildings, and there are a number of factors that can impact rent. The second point you made was people are homeless, they can't afford them. So one of our duties within Housing Needs is to ensure that anyone that we're housing will be able to afford the property that we're putting them in. And you might have heard us talk about homes Portsmouth people can afford. So we have a set business rule that ensures that we never charge our rent at above rent and service charge equating to the local housing allowance. And that's to make sure that it's recoverable through housing benefit. But the other thing is Shane's team, Shane's the head of Housing Needs, will work with residents to understand the type of accommodation that they can move into, and the vast majority of our housing stock is charged at social rent. So we don't have to put someone into one of these properties, and we do always think about how the applicant fits to the home. So there is consideration across different rent types and across different landlords to be able to allocate housing.
However, Greg, it is a fair point, because in planning terms, an affordable rent is 80% of the market level, which bugger all people can afford. So therefore, it's a very fair point, but it's just slightly different in this context. Any other questions or comments at all, Greg?
Sorry, would you mind moving closer to the microphone so that I've been told that you're not heard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this particular person had no choice. They were taken in. There was no pre-assessment made if they could afford it. She was told you have this option, no other option, and I don't believe the property was completely bought.
And I think, Greg, with a specific case like that, which on the surface sounds horrific, I suggest you've got a team back there, have a chat with them. I think the four of us all get these sorts of things from time to time. The team is very clear that I do not want circular firing squads of evicting people in order to house homeless people, because that's just cheap. Yeah. But if it's a specific case, then please raise that. As far as the general point is concerned, I think in this case it doesn't apply, in my view. And your wider point is that there's two different concepts of affordable rents, as those of us who had the pleasure of being on the planning committee in this council well know. So it's around trying to make sure it's not above the local housing allowance, which this government chose to freeze in the budget last year.
It's Millie's flat, actually.
Right, that's lovely. Please go back. Please go back. Talk to them. Thank you, however, for that, Greg. Mary.
I have no questions, thank you.
Spencer?
No questions, thank you.
You can make comments as well, I don't mind.
Or comments.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, the upper limit of 300,000 per property, it does seem as if that does actually limit where we can actually purchase these properties from around the town, because there are certain areas, I'm looking at Spencer when I'm saying this, that basically will be completely out of our remit for that. Was there a reason why it was set at 300,000?
So we're always looking to provide the maximum accommodation we can. So we're looking to the market to look at reasonable assets that allow us to provide a 3-bedroom home and above or below, depending. The reality is that what we've done is we've used the data that we have already available to us from our current buyback programme. And so we know that in real terms, our majority, the vast majority of our purchases always sit under 200,000. What we do have is a capacity through our director to bring something in a case outside of those business rules, should we want to, for something really special that we feel is very important, we can do that. But it is very, very rare that we would buy for something in excess of 300,000, and generally our acquisitions are under 2.
Just on from that,
No, so if it comes back to you, yell. Okay, and that's not an age thing. Okay. So, subject to whatever Ray says, I'm delighted that everybody in this room here voted for the principle of this in the budget meeting 3 weeks ago. This is just carrying it out, effectively. And I'm certainly aware of the potential this programme has to distort the marketplace in the city. We won't sugarcoat that. However, when you're in a crisis, you stop digging. I think that's the first thing we've got to do. This is the biggest single investment in homelessness this city has ever had. And it's about time. Because too many people are living in homes that are too dear for them and too dear for the council. And we cannot have, £6 million worth of extra money that frankly could be spent on keeping the services that we've got going on this. So therefore obviously this is, I have to say, my idea. So therefore I'm obviously delighted about it. But I think the key thing is to make sure that we deliver the savings that we've said we're going to make. I'm particularly keen to make sure that the words that it is a minimum of 200 properties, I stress the word minimum, colleagues, because we want to try and invest more. And they will go, Ray, you've remembered now.
I've remembered now, yes.
I'm happily will be interrupted for this.
Is it limited just to buyback properties, or is it unlimited? You can actually go after any property.
So we've got a number of acquisition threads, and within this one we are predominantly targeting the buyback properties, so we're targeting things that are within blocks that we're already maintaining, where we understand those buildings and where we already have a good understanding. Within the wider acquisition piece, we will look at just about anything that helps us to meet need. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that this pot particularly delivers quickly. And so we would probably be more likely, if we're looking at something that isn't in one of our existing stock items, it's probably for a secure tenancy. And so that would be more likely to be looked at through our repurchases pot, where we're looking to provide general needs secure accommodation. So nothing's off the table. We do have those principles that guide all of our acquisition work. But in this one particularly, we are aiming for that existing stock piece to give that security and that speed of transfer.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ray. As I was saying, this is the biggest single investment in homelessness this city's seen. But the problem is acute. We can't afford to have £6 million lying on being paid for essentially by people's council tax and government grants on this bill. So we've got to get it down. And my view has always been that we go big or we go home. And this council has decided to go big so everyone else can have a home to go to. And that is very, very important. I'm in the interests of transparency. It's important that we make sure that we have regular reports, although my understanding of the modelling is if you're expecting any bill to come down in the first 3 months, don't. But it is important that we have that detail because we've made various commitments to people to make sure we can reduce the temporary accommodation bill. We welcome, as I said at the full council meeting, we welcome the government's investment, extra investment in temporary accommodation. However, it doesn't touch the sides of the problem that we've got. And so it's about time that we do. And I'm pleased we are. So this is one of the things I think we should all be most proud of in this council. Now what we've got to do is buy them. I refuse.
This
Mary.
is great news for our city and for the homelessness people that belong to our city. And I've just remembered that I was informed as the chair of the scrutiny panel. Sorry about that.
I am delighted. That's one less person to have a gentle discussion with afterwards. So we're going to make sure it happens, because we can't have people homeless, and we certainly can't have people homeless in incredibly expensive accommodation, which is what we've been forced to do. So I look forward to the updates, and I'm sure everybody who is involved will also look forward to the bill coming down and people having a home, which is the most important thing for them. So, colleagues, on that basis, I'm happy to agree to all the recommendations with that, and we get cracking. Is that all right? Colleagues, thank you very much. This is really sensational news, and well done. So, I now move to the next item, which may or may not be as good, I don't know, which is the euphemistically titled Council Housing Maintenance and Improvement and Housing IT Business Software. So, thank you for that. So, who is going to start? Young Adam.
Thank you. So the purpose of the report is to go through the allocation of the revenue and capital expenditure for the HRA in relation to the council housing maintenance, non-dwelling assets and associated IT provision. The revenue budget was set via the council housing budget, including rents in January 25, and the capital budget was set as part of the main council budget in February. The report also outlines work undertaken in year, forecasts our end-of-year position, and also details the pressures going into 25-2026. Section 2 outlines the recommendation. It's asked that the allocation of revenue expenditure is noted. The allocation of capital funding in Appendix B and C is approved. That the building safety remediation programme is noted, and that with that, reports will be brought back each March to approve the future year's capital funding. And also that is noted how the budget allocation supports improvement work around our recent regulatory judgment, and that also an end-of-year position is noted, and then we'll bring a mid-year report back to update on progress. Section 3, and I think throughout the report, details how we're responding to our recent regulatory judgment for the regulator of social housing. So the allocations have been set up to try and support work to sort of address some of those issues. Key headline things from that are we're increasing our allocation of funding to electrical safety to increase our amount of inspections to 20% per year. We also have increased our allocations to addressing fire risk assessment actions. You'll see obviously with the building safety remediation programme, that's a huge commitment in finance to address those issues. And alongside this, we've also improved staffing budgets within building services to provide additional resources to sort of meet some of those demands. And we've also provided additional resources to work on our stock condition surveys to improve our sort of decent homes standard. We've also increased funding for adaptations to meet with demand, and also recognising the City Council's housing allocation policy, we're increasing our void allocation to try and respond to that. There's a commitment to decarbonisation works through Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund projects, and also the Charles Dickens Heat Network project. And then finally, you'll see that we've allocated specific planned capital budgets for boilers, roofs and windows, so we can start to proactively replace these elements, which helps with the meeting of decent home standards. Moving on then, so section 4 outlines the revenue allocation. So for 25-26, it's just over 31.2 million, which is a 2.7% uplift from last year. Section 5 outlines the capital allocation, which is the baseline is just over 30.3 million. That's a 6.19% increase. We've rolled forward funding from this year, along with grant funding. The total capital budget is 34.9 million. Just to sort of clarify, if you look at Appendix B, you'll see the total expenditure for those projects is 41 million. The reason it's higher is because the difference is basically additional external grant funding that we anticipate receiving this year. So we will be within our means there. Within section 6, you'll see it summarises the works that we've undertaken this year, and you'll obviously see there's some key areas there in terms of compliance activities and repair activities we've undertaken. In terms of from a financial perspective, we're forecasting a net 800,000 overspend, and this is largely due to sort of some of the demands we're seeing. So we're trying to repair more items rather than do replacement if we can. We're undertaking more substantial measures through our damp and mould works to sort of address issues in the long term. And also we have a number of elements nearing the end of their life, such as windows and roofs, which the new sort of capital allocations should help. In terms of capital expenditure for this year, overall it will underspend, and any underspend will move forward into the next financial year, and this is due to sort of natural slippage that we see with projects, and also some delays that we're incurring around our building control process going through the building safety regulator. It's basically more onerous than it used to be, and it's taking time to get those projects through. Section 7 just provides a general overview from the Building Cost Information Service about an industry forecast. I think we're seeing generally the industry is stabilising in terms of sort of cost and material costs. The main risk factor identified is around wage growth, and potentially that'll be exacerbated by the national insurance increase coming up. We've discussed this with our current service providers, and I think what they're seeing is largely reflective of the BCIS industry forecast. Section 8, I'll go through in a little bit of detail. This basically covers our building safety remediation programme. I think it's a key piece of work to focus on. So basically this is a medium-term programme which is set up to address works coming out of our building safety cases we've been preparing. There's 22 high-rise blocks in scope alongside some of our mid-rise blocks where we've identified issues. We've undertaken a wide range of surveys and investigations across all those buildings, and from that we've been able to prepare budget costs, assess the risk, assess mitigation needed, then obviously build it into a programme. The overall quantum of the programme is anticipated to be around £110 million over the next 7 years. And it's anticipated that £70 million of that would be funded through the HRA, with a further £40 million being received for external grants. I think a key bit just to note for everyone is that there's flexibility built into the programme. Where the blocks are allocated to financial years, that's when we will start to evaluate it. Due to the complexity of the works, it's likely that we won't commence on site for a further year, and also due to the nature of the programme being over 7 years, there could be new demands for sort of fire safety works, building safety works that arise, which would mean we may need to prioritise and reprogram the order of the buildings. So then going on to section 9, this covers sort of budget pressures and sort of mitigation around that. I think one of the key things to sort of stress with this report coming forward is going into this financial year, we're anticipating a £1 million pressure going into the year, and this is largely due to sort of direct cost increases from sort of national insurance and cost of living increases for our service providers, and then obviously that has a knock-on impact through our supply chain as well. The team will obviously try to manage that in year, but it's increasingly challenging. We've also obviously increased the electrical inspection funding and the void allocations, which again is adding to that. In previous years, we've used contingency to help sort of mitigate some of that. We still have contingency in the budget this year, but the level is reduced, so it's just noting that there's a higher financial risk there. And we are, alongside this, we're doing a piece of work around scope of service review, so that, subject to approval, would potentially help generate some further efficiencies that can help manage the budget in year. And longer term, we have the asset management strategy piece of work and trying to rebalance our capital and revenue expenditure, which should hopefully help, again, address some of our revenue pressures. Finally, Section 10 just covers off around sort of resident consultation and engagement. So we've been doing a lot of consultation and engagement with our residents around our repairs and maintenance and gas contract procurement and around our service delivery. And hopefully the budget allocation is supporting sort of a lot of the feedback we've had, and it should hopefully align with sort of the sort of priorities that we've received from residents. And also in this section, it covers off our general processes around, for any major project, how we would engage with residents, communicate with them, and try and minimise disruption to them throughout the course of the project. I'll hand to Merrick now just to summarise some of the IT aspects, and then I think Alan will just jump in on any last financial comments.
Thank you, Alan. So for the IT report, there's 4 aspects. The first is the Windows 11 upgrade for the HRA CCTV estate. So the HRA has several CCTV cameras covering all its sites. Each setup has within it a PC for connecting the camera and monitoring the footage. This year, the machines will all need to be upgraded to Windows 11 in order to keep them secure, compliant within our security standards, and more importantly, keep them working. This provision is for the physical hardware and the technical labour to support the required upgrades. The second item is the NEC Housing Management System rehosting. So NEC is the system used to manage rental income for our residential and non-residential properties. The current setup has some technical elements going end of life next year, which, if left unchecked, would put us at risk. To mitigate this risk, the solution is to migrate from our current on-premise setup over in the Civic Office data centre over to the supplier-hosted service. This will provide future assurance for the platform for aspects including security, disaster recovery, and ongoing updates. As the platform is shared with colleagues in the Revenues and Benefits team, this provision is a percentage contribution from the HRA towards the technology and resources required to complete the work. The third item is Wi-Fi upgrades. So visitor Wi-Fi is available in PCC sites across buildings across the city. For the HRA, it's available and consumed primarily within our community centres. This provision is the percentage contribution towards a required technical upgrade on the Wi-Fi access points and the back-end infrastructure that carries the service. And the final point is the complaints management application. So the contract for the current application, which is used by corporate services, adult social care and housing, expires later this year. There's a project currently underway to move to a new application. This provision is the contribution for the HRA section of the application, which is used by the housing team to log and manage housing complaints. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to draw attention to the other non-dwelling capital schemes within Appendix C, specifically on page 46. There's a commitment to spending money on a venture playground play equipment, to Paul's Grove Community Centre and to relining splash parks. Those 3 projects are on HRA assets, but because the service is tenure blind, we have received a 25% contribution from the general fund towards those works. Other than that, nothing to add to the finance comments, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Alan and Merrick and Adam. Greg, from the Residents' Consortium, do you have any questions or comments at all about this paper?
We have actually talked about this quite a lot. It's been quite an in-depth thing, and most of what's here is what they want. They're very keen with things like repairs that they just want to know when the people are coming to do them. They don't have complaints about the repairs. They have complaints about waiting for someone who doesn't come. And generally speaking, they're very understanding of the situation. And we're very understanding of the fact that a lot of the stock is very old and there's expensive work to be done. I've just recently had a bathroom done, and I'm just recovering.
I shan't probe why. But no, that's kind, Greg, and thank you very much. Ray, did you have any questions or comments at all?
No, I'm going to say I just appreciate the amount of work that has actually gone into this. It must have taken up an awful lot of their times.
Thank you for that, Ray. Spencer, do you have any questions or comments at all? Nope. Okay, lovely. Mary, do you have any questions or comments at all?
This is a lot of work, thank you.
That's all right, thank you. I have one question for the team, and then I do have some comments. You mentioned the building safety regulator, as if that seems to be holding up work that we're doing in terms of trying to improve the safety of our stock. Is that something that affects Portsmouth, or are we finding that other councils across the country are in the same boat?
I think it's a national issue. The process has changed where it's a lot more vigorous in terms of what they're looking at. So when you do an application, it goes off to a number of specialist consultants who then review the detail of the application and then come back with queries, etc. I think we talked to other councils, and I think we're seeing this is quite common, where it's taking time to get that approved, basically, a lot longer than previously. So we're having to try and factor that into our programmes to make sure we're accounting for that period.
Thank you for that, Adam. I know the Chief Executive and the leader meet regularly with the two local MPs, and that may be something that you may want to feed in through the food chain to them, because we want to try and make sure that that process works for us and works for our tenants, whilst understanding the rationale behind it, which essentially is to stop another Grenfell, and the horror of the ignorance and the negligence that led to that horror show. So feel free to feed that back in. I have a few observations, if that's okay, colleagues. I think strategically there are many things that are all coming together. The first, which Adam has just outlined, is the regulatory environment, which is increasingly tough. And that's perfectly understandable, because this government, rightly, is not wanting a rerun of Grenfell. That is absolutely correct. And absolutely has to happen. But we need to make sure that's okay. We also have the judgment from the social housing regulator, which it appears in the League One playoffs or the Division 3 playoffs, on the borderline of C2 and C3 in their categories. We want to try and make sure that we get out of Division 3 and get into Division 2, and that may require some extra work, and does require some extra work, but that means rebalancing or changing the budget to do that. And that means less of other stuff, because this government, like the last one, is choosing to cap the rents of council tenants, which may be great for council tenants, but not for private landlords. And that does create a problem in that our money is capped and our spending isn't. And then there are other things that work. My understanding is the national insurance changes alone from April will cost £1.25 million. And that's coming out of people's rents. And that's less repairs. And that's, less things we want to do. And again, that's difficult. So that may mean some quite painful decisions going along the way. And that will be tough for tenants, and every tenant will rightly complain when it affects them. But if you're going to compensate for managers but not cleaners, then that sadly is what we're going to have to do. So that means some tough decisions going forward. And that comes back to the third aspect of it all, which is the age of the stock and the age of the assets. And the team is rightly going through an asset management strategy, which is designed to reduce the costs of depreciation, which is in severe danger of ruining whatever reserves we've got left if we're not careful. But that will require, again, some tough decisions going forward. That's a politician's euphemism speak for things people don't like. But that is going to happen, my friends and colleagues. And we have to be realistic with people about that. And that's why we're rebalancing or changing the budget to reflect things accordingly. It's not nice, it's not pretty, people will complain, but this is life. If we're to make sure that we can get through these periods. But we need to be open and honest about it, and this report is. And so I'm incredibly grateful to colleagues for doing it. I'm also incredibly grateful to colleagues in the IT system, because we need to make sure IT works, because if it doesn't work, then we're all in trouble. But I'm not happy with the situation that we've got, but I'm prepared to accept this report and take it forwards. And I think, Adam, when we come back with the mid-year report, we have to be very honest with people about what this means and what the changes mean, not least as we are, through the social housing regulator, moving towards standards that we believe don't work for tenants and leaseholders. But we have to make sure that we can compromise between the work we've learnt over the last few years and the desires particularly of the social housing regulator. So honesty going forwards is very useful. I'm sure we will all appreciate that. So Jane, I can't say I like approving this, because I'm going to approve more money for repairs and everything else. But I'm prepared to accept the recommendations going forwards. So, colleagues, thank you very much. Thank you very much for putting up with this. I therefore close the meeting at 4.